Hey, we're going to try something a little bit different tonight with my laptop instead of notes. So bear with me as we figure this out together. How you guys doing? Okay, it's a little rough. It's week 2 of school, I get it. Awesome. Well, welcome to Awaken, guys. We genuinely are so glad that you're here. Thursday nights have been my favorite night of the week for about 10 years. And it's because of this, because we all get to worship together, we get to know each other a little bit more, and we get to know God more. And so I love being here with you. Hopefully you love it just as much as I do. But that might be a stretch because I love it a lot. So anyways, glad that you guys are here. I don't know how many of you were here on Sunday. This isn't like I'm not like taking attendance or checking on anything, I'm just curious. We had a really amazing Sunday. So last week we had our first service ever in this building. And on Sunday we got to have our first morning service ever as a church. And if you were here with us, you got to just celebrate what the faithfulness of God to this church has been. Like, for a church to have a building like this within the first year doesn't happen really regularly. And so we're extremely thankful, and we're thankful that you're in it with us. Sorry, is that me? And so we had a huge Sunday. It's been a really exciting week, and now we're all kind of settling into okay, this is the rhythm of our church, this is the rhythm of the school year, here's how it's gonna go. And so my hope and prayer, as you guys are all sitting here, is that we get to go into this year together, following Jesus together, encouraging one another together, and running after him as hard as we can. And so that's what we believe in Awaken here, is that we are people who are meant to be awakened by the love of God, transformed in his presence, and then sent out to the world around us that they would get to experience the same. So, as Hayes said, my name is Meleah, and I am the college pastor here. And last week we had our first Awaken, where we kind of did an intro to the year. So it wasn't really a series, it was just a standalone, but we talked a lot about this word that I feel like God has given us for this year as a college ministry of being really, really certain about the truth. And so we talked about knowing what's true and how important it is to actually know this, which is true and leads us to the one who is truth. We talked about living out the truth. It's not meant to just sit with us and for us to know a lot, but it's actually supposed to be walked out in our daily lives. And then we're meant to be people who share the truth. So whether that is our friends that don't know Jesus, people on the other side of the world that we don't know, or even our roommates that do love Jesus, and we're like, hey, there are things that you're believing about God and what his word says that just aren't true, and you need to know that. And so there's this challenge for us to not just be people who will know God and settle into like, okay, yeah, like I'll do the Christian thing, I'll go to chapel, I'll go to the church things, but we're actually supposed to be, and we're called to be people who live a different life because we know the truth. So that's last week. This week we're starting a new series. Do we have the graphic? Maybe. It's good. Shout out Liv. So we're starting a new series called Who Is This King? And how we got here is we met together over the summer, and we just said, hey, God, what are you speaking? What are you doing? How do you want us to put a sermon series together for this semester? And in line with we have to know what's true, we also have to know what's not true. And so we have to know what's true about God and what's not true about who he is. And so this series of Who Is This King is us taking a look at some of his characteristics, some of his attributes, and just diving into them a little bit deeper so that we can know who God is and who he's not. The problem with doing a 4-week series on this is I don't know how well you know God, but there are way more than 4 attributes to him, right? There's a lot that we can unpack. And so we probably won't get to all of the ones that you would love for us to talk about, or that you have questions about, or anything like that. But we have these 4 over the next few weeks, because these are the ones that we felt like God really wanted us to highlight and hone in on, and so we're just trusting him with that. So tonight is going to be about his holiness. And can I be honest with you for a second? Are we good? Are we good at that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. I would be a little bit nervous if you said no. I have, throughout today, so tonight, I have felt a little bit intimidated by tonight. Just to be very real, because the holiness of God is kind of a big topic. I'm like, do we want to go there? Yes, we do. And as I've been writing today's message, talking through it with the Lord, I have constantly been reminded of 2 Corinthians 12, where it's Paul writing to the Corinthians, he's writing this letter, and he's going through trial, and he writes them, and he says, but God said to me, Paul, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. And so Paul says, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. Therefore, I will delight in insults, in persecutions, in difficulties, and hardships, for when I am weak, then he is strong. And what I'm encouraged by tonight is that it actually doesn't really matter how great I feel about this or how well none of that matters, because when we are weak, we're at maybe not our most confident or best or whatever, that's when God shows up. And so I actually feel really expectant that God is going to do something tonight. I don't know what, but I'm expectant for it. Sound good?
Yes,
ma'am. Okay. Go ahead and turn with me to Isaiah chapter 6. So this will be on the screen behind me, but you can turn to it in your Bible, flip to it on your phone, whatever you got to do to get there. Isaiah chapter 6. We don't know a whole lot about Isaiah. We're actually not even entirely sure that he wrote this book. They think it might have been written by a few different authors. But what we do know about Isaiah is that he was a Jewish prophet. So he had this relationship with God where he heard from him and then delivered God's messages to the Jewish people on behalf of God. And he had this dynamic with him that very few other people did as a prophet. So this is his account of a vision that he has. It's a little strange, but hang in there with me, okay? Starting in verse 1, he says, in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord. That's awesome. He's high and exalted, seated on a throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphim, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I am ruined, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So who is this king? As we're asking the question, he's our holy king. Did you notice that these seraphim, these angelic beings that he's seeing in this vision, are flying around saying, holy, holy, holy? Of all the words they could have said about God here, they chose holy. If it was me, not that I would ever be flying around the throne room of God, but if it was me, I probably would have said something like good, loving, righteous, caring, compassionate, gracious. I don't know if holy would have been my first description. And yet, they were like, no, this isn't a characteristic of God. This is who God is. He isn't just described as holy, he is holy. Fully and completely, he's holy. Now, this is written, and this is all happening in Hebrew, Old Testament, people at the time, language at the time, Hebrew. And what we miss, because we don't know Hebrew, is that when they say something 3 times, it's not used that often, but when they do, it's because it is the utmost importance, it's the highest, it's the most total, complete, whatever the thing is, it's that's the most. So when they're saying holy, 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 what they are communicating is he is the most holy. There is no one else holier than him. He is the highest. He is the holiest of all holy things. There's just nothing that can possibly compare to his holiness. And the word itself, holy, I don't fully speak Hebrew, and I've seen a few different versions to say it, but it's kadosh or kadesh. And what that means is to set apart, often to set apart for a specific purpose. It means it's separate, it's other than. And so God is not just, I think often when we think of holiness, we think moral perfection, right? We're like, yes, if something is holy, it's like better. Like it's morally right. And yes, God is morally perfect. He created morality, therefore he knows what he's talking about. But it's more than just morality, like morally good. For him to be holy means he is in a whole other category on his own. He is set apart. There is very little, like there's nothing that can compare to him. And I've wrestled with trying to define this all day because I'm like, how do you define something that can't be defined like any other way than just like, it's God? Like, it's like trying to define something with the word itself, right? It's just hard to communicate that way. But in order for him to be intrinsically holy, intrinsically set apart from the rest of everything else, for him to be the most holy, that means there is something that is inherently less holy, right? That he is set apart from. Any guesses what that is? Nice and loud. Us, right. We are not holy. I don't know if you've caught on to that yet at this point in life. I know me personally, not that holy. But read Isaiah 6 again with me, starting in verse 4. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, for I am ruined. I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips. And my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. So in this scene, God hasn't done anything. He has not said anything. He's literally just sitting there. Everyone else is talking about how holy he is. All Isaiah does is show up, and he's like, oh, dang. He's God, and I'm not. Woe is me. Like, there is something in this moment where he immediately recognizes just how unholy he is compared to the one in front of him. And he's so aware that he starts immediately confessing. And not just for him, but like for his whole people. Do you see that? He's like, I am a man of unclean lips, so is everyone around me. Sorry about it. Like, we're not that great when we look at God. And there's another man in the Bible. There's actually a couple. We'll get to them. But there's another man in Luke 5 that has a similar experience. You've heard of him before, I'm sure. Let me flip over there. So Luke 5, and it's when Jesus is at the beginning of his ministry. He hasn't done a whole lot yet. He's starting to meet some people, getting to know his disciples, and he comes across these fishermen that have been fishing all night, haven't caught anything, right? And he says, hey, I know you haven't caught anything. Go put your net on the other side of the boat. Try again. They're like, I don't know if you've noticed we're professionals, but sure, we'll do it your way. So they do. They obey him. And what happens is miraculous. Like, there's no other word for it than absolutely miraculous, because all of these fish that they have somehow avoided the whole night appear, so much so that they have to call out to one another to come get help, because it's like, we're suddenly overflowing with fish, right? What does this have to do with God? Great question. In verse 4, Jesus finishes speaking, and he says to Simon, this is Luke 5, put it out into the deep water, let the nets down for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night, haven't caught anything. Because you say so, I will let down the nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. Verse 8, when Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. These are two very different men in history, right? Isaiah, Old Testament, prophet. He's having this like open vision of God in his throne room, and his experience is, oh my gosh, God is so holy, I'm so sinful, right? And then you have Peter, fisherman, uneducated, in the New Testament. This is an account of history, and he gets into the presence of God and he goes, oh, I'm not like you. Like, I am a sinful man. And what's so interesting is these are two completely different encounters with God. And both circumstances lead these men to confession. And what I think we're seeing here is that the purity of holiness is greater and more powerful than our sin. And so when our sin comes up against the holiness of God, the only right response is for him to expose it and drive it out of us. For him to bring it up to the surface and say, it doesn't have a place here. So when they see God in all of his righteousness, his holiness, all that comes out is, oh, get this out of me. Like, I am sinful. I can't stay like this anymore, right? And this concept of God making us, driving out our sin and making us more like him was revolutionary. Because back in the Old Testament, right, there's this group of people called the Israelites. You've probably heard of them at some point. And what the Old Testament often gets a bad rap for is there's a lot of rules in it, which there are. That's fair. It's a lot of here's what not to do, don't do this, if this happens, make sure you do this to clean it up, all of these things. And they're all centered around this idea of cleanliness. Because back then, God lived in one place, the temple, the Holy of Holies. So there was a temple, there was the centerpiece, and it was the point of God's dwelling and his holiness. And so they called it literally the Holy of Holies. And nobody could go in there except for like one guy every once in a while. He had to do all this extra stuff. But on the outskirts of the Holy of Holies, people could come, and if they wanted to worship God, they had to offer sacrifices, they had to make sure they were clean, they had to do all of these things to be ritualistic? Ritualistically pure so that they could actually get into the presence of God, or even close to the presence of God. And so there's all these things that it was like, hey, if you touch someone that has a disease, if you touch something that has died, basically anything that was like symbolic of death or disease or just brokenness meant you were unclean. And they believed that if you touch something that was unclean, its uncleanliness transferred to you, making you unclean, right? So you'd have to do all these things to get right again. And that was normal. It was like, man, if we're gonna go in the presence of God, we can't be unclean. We have to do all this ritual like washing and sacrifices and all of these things so that we will get this uncleanliness out of us. This is pre-Jesus days. So then Jesus comes on the scene and he flips the whole script. Like, he goes up to the lepers and he says, no, I'm gonna touch you. Your uncleanness is not gonna transfer to me. My wholeness, my restoration is gonna bring life to you. He completely changes the game because he says, I'm gonna touch you and make you clean and make you holy. It's a game changer, right? And all throughout Leviticus, where all of these rules are, God is saying to his people, be holy because I am holy. Like, the whole reason for this is that we would be like God because he is so holy. And the beautiful thing is that he made a way for that to happen through Jesus. Like Jesus, who is innocent and perfect in every way, who lives this sinless life and makes himself the sacrifice that we should have made, so that when he rose again, we could actually walk in this kind of holiness with God, where he makes us clean. We don't have to do all of the things that we used to have to do, but because of Jesus, we actually can walk into what we were created for. And while God is perfectly holy in every way, we're not, as we know. And so when he tells us to be holy, he's not asking, like, I want to get rid of this right now. He's not asking for perfection. And I think sometimes we hear that and we're like, but I can't be. Like, I'm going to mess up tomorrow or at least by next week, right? Like, we know this about ourselves. He's not asking us to get it all together and be perfect. What he's asking is that we would be set apart. Another definition I've heard of holy is something that is completely devoted to something. So what he's asking is, would you be completely mine? Would you be fully devoted to me? Would you be set apart so that you actually don't look like the rest of the world? One really good analogy I've heard for this is if you grew up in this kind of household, there was like the regular day-to-day plates, like you're, microwaving your meal, you grab a plate, stick it on there, whatever. And then there's like the special occasion, like the China plates or like the Christmas plates, you know what I'm talking about? They live in that room that like you're not really allowed to go in ever, even as an adult. And they have their own special place. And when you use them, it's like a special occasion. Like you don't just use them for like some random lunch, right? It's like, oh, it's Christmas. Like we're getting the good plates. And at the end, you hand wash them. You're really careful with them. You put them back where they're supposed to go. Not with the rest of the plates. The rest of the plates, who cares? They get dirty, whatever. Throw them in the dishwasher. If they get a little bit chipped, it's fine. But these plates, these are special. They're set apart for a specific purpose, right? And this is how we are meant to live, where we're actually recognizing God has made us for a specific purpose. We're set apart. We don't live the way that everyone else lives because we were made for something different. And this isn't like an elitist, like, gosh, we Christians have it all figured out. And we've got it all together and we're better than everyone. That's not it at all. Because the good news is that anyone that follows Jesus becomes one of those China plates, set apart, devoted to something specific, which is God. So as God's people, we're made to be other than. We're not supposed to live how the world lives. We don't watch or listen to the same things that everyone else does. We don't say the same words that everyone else does. We don't talk about people the same way everyone else does. We don't flip people off on the freeway when they cut us off like everyone else does, right? We live in Arizona, it's real. And this isn't just like this isn't about legalism, okay? I think we have started slapping legalism on a lot of things because we don't really like to hear it. But legalism, by definition, is strict, literal, or excessive adherence to the law. So saying, hey, we want to change our behavior because we want to be more like God is not legalism, it's holiness. So for example, like legalism would be saying, and I've heard this before, legalism would be every single R-rated movie is wrong. If you watch it, you're a sinner. I think that's legalism, personally. I don't see it in the Bible. Holiness is, man, I love Jesus. I want to watch the things that he would watch. And it just so happens to be that most R-rated movies probably are what he would watch. Maybe Passion of the Christ, I don't know. Pray about it. Do you see the difference? Where legalism says this is how you must live out the law, and if you don't, you're wrong. Holiness says, how in the world do I possibly be as much like Jesus as I can be? Okay. One thought that I have as I've walked this out with people over the years. Some of us are naturally more bent towards confession and righteousness. Like we hear that and we're like, easy. Like not easy, but like, sure, I'll get in the presence of God. I'll do the confession thing. Like, I want to be holy. And then some of us, the others of us, don't really like the feeling of all of our unholiness and sin being brought to the surface. And what I mean by that is like, maybe this is you, maybe it's not. But like you're sitting in worship, you're in the presence of God, it's awesome. And he goes, hey, can we maybe address when you blew up at your roommate earlier for not cleaning their dishes again? And you're like, no, it's okay. Like it's actually, like we've moved past it. We just have an understanding. I know we didn't talk about it. We have an understanding. It's fine. We can just move on. We don't need to address that, God. Or maybe it sounds like you get really defensive and you're like, oh, I know, I messed up again. You don't need to bring this up. I already know, okay? We just don't need to talk about it. And in either response, what we're doing is we're pulling ourselves out of the light of his holy presence, and we're saying, I'm just gonna stand over here. Like, I don't really wanna talk about that with you. I know you're bringing it up, but we don't need to address it. And so rather than dealing with it and being okay with the discomfort for a moment, we take a step back out of his presence and we say, I'll just I'll look at your holiness from over here. And then often we get to this point where we're like, I just don't really, like I kind of understand the holiness of God, but I don't really feel like it has an impact on my life. And that happens because we've gone all the way over here. We've shut him down so many times that we're like, yeah, he's good. He's moral. It's awesome. But when we're actually in his presence, when we understand just how holy he is and he brings things up and we're like, yeah, you're right. Like, we got to get that out of me because it's not like you. That's when he loves to move. It's not a punishment. It's an invitation into his presence. And go back with me to Isaiah 6 for a second. Yeah, we're going to do it. Back in Isaiah 6, I was reading this week, and there's this moment where the seraphim, hold on, sorry. I'm just going to get there. The seraphim, starting in verse 6, he picks up this live coal with his hand, with tongs, because it's hot, right? Picks it up with these tongs, and he brings it over to Isaiah, and he touches it to his lips. That sounds like that would hurt, like a lot. Like he's using tongs to pick this thing up, and he's like, here, I'm going to put it on your mouth. That doesn't sound fun. But what comes out of it is he says, see, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away and your sin atoned for. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. And so what's happening in this moment is there's a little bit of discomfort. There's a little bit of pain. But the end result is purity. There's a purification that happens in the throne room where Isaiah receives this forgiveness, this purification, and then God says, I can use that. I'm looking for someone that wants to do what I want them to do. I can use you now that you're pure. And so while it can be uncomfortable and maybe not our favorite, it's so necessary for us to actually make it for the long haul with God, doing the things that he's called us to do. Okay. So we know that God is fully set apart from us. He's completely different in every way. And that means that he cannot sin. He's perfect. He can't sin. It's not in his nature. He is inherently holy. And so every single thing that he does is enveloped in this holiness. So if he cannot sin, then he cannot sin against you, right? And I think logically, we all know this. Like, if God is perfect, he's not going to sin against me. Got it. But can we sit with this for a second and understand that if he cannot sin against you, then that means the hurt that we feel from him sometimes, or the disappointment that our life hasn't turned out the way that we thought it would sometimes, and we're like, God, that's your fault. Straight up, like, that's on you. I think there's a place where we have to question that because he cannot sin against you. He's never going to fail you. He's never going to let you down. And I think we know that, but then the actual walking out of it is really hard sometimes. My favorite example of this is, it's way too long to read. It's like most of the book of Exodus. But in Exodus 3, you see Moses come up to this burning bush that's described as the holiness of God, and he says, take off your shoes because this is holy ground, right? He establishes with Moses, I am holy. Okay, so Moses encounters God's holiness. And then God says, I've heard the suffering of my people. I know they're oppressed. I've heard their prayers, their cries, and I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to get you out of there. There's going to be a couple of detours along the way. Don't worry about it. But I'm going to take you to the promised land. And so he literally tells Moses everything that's about to happen. Everything. Like, it's Exodus 3. You can read it. And so Moses, knowing the full plan, goes, great, I'm on board. So he leads the people out. They're in the wilderness. 13 chapters later, and all the Israelites are like, listen, this has not gone how we thought it would. We're in the desert. I'm pretty sure you left us out here to die of starvation. We probably should have just stayed in Egypt. And they completely give up on the promises of God. And they get a really bad rap for this. We're like, oh, silly Israelites. They should have known better. But I think we can relate to this a lot more than we'd like to admit. where we're sitting in the desert and we're like, God, what the heck? Like, you said this, you gave me this dream, and it's not happening yet. You asked me to pray for my family, and I really thought you were going to do something, and I haven't seen it yet. And we give up on God because we feel the disappointment of the desert, just like the Israelites did. But you know who did not give up in the middle of the desert? The one who actually saw face to face the holiness of God. Moses is the only one that's like fully convinced God is going to do what he said he's going to do. So if you're wrestling with disappointment, or you're feeling like God has hurt you, I think he's okay with that. Like, genuinely, I think he's fully capable of handling every emotion. And if you want proof, read the Psalms. Specifically, I think Psalm 13 is a really good one, where he gets really honest with the Lord. If you don't know how to be really honest with the Lord, you should learn. It's actually awesome. Where he goes, hey, God, I feel like you've let me down. I feel like you're out to kill me. It's rough out here. But he ends it with, but I praise you, God. Because he doesn't let his feelings about God dictate the truth. He lets God dictate the truth. And he says, I know at the end of the day, you are who you say you are, and you're holy and I'm not, and so I submit that to you. I will submit to you my disappointment. I will submit to you my frustration, and know that you're going to take care of it. You can go ahead and come up, Gavin. Don't stay in the desert of disappointment like the Israelites. But guys, we have to know the holiness of God. And it's not just so that we have a better theological understanding of who he is. We have to know his holiness by being close enough to experience it. By being close enough to him that the junk of our lives actually comes to the surface so that he can deal with it and we can look more like him. We need to be close enough to him for us to be refined by him, for us to actually know him more. Because when we're with him, when we're in his presence, we can distinguish the truth from the lies a lot more easily. So, we're going to spend the rest of tonight just responding to him. And you can respond to him however feels right to you. If you already know, then that's great. But if nothing comes to mind, I think there are a couple of different ways that we can actually take practical steps to respond to him. And the first is if you're the person that's like, I feel hurt by God, I think you need to talk to him about it. And say, God, I know I feel hurt by you, but I also know that you cannot fail me. So can we work this out? I've been praying those for years, and I think I'm closer to the Lord now than I was years ago before I started doing that. There's something really beautiful about coming to him in your honesty and recognizing that he is fully trustworthy, that we have every reason in the world to put all of our faith and hope and trust in him, because he's never going to sin against us, and he's never going to sin, period. So it's awesome. So maybe you just need to sit and journal and talk and pray with him about the places that you have felt that. Maybe you just need to get close to him again and sit in his presence. And what I mean by that, that's like a vague concept that we throw out there sometimes, and we're like, great, but what does that actually mean? I don't really know. I think it looks different for everyone, but here's what I think. I think God has given us minds to not fully understand him, but to understand him as best we can. And so that could mean you sit there with your eyes closed and you picture yourself in the throne room like Isaiah. And you're like, God, I want to see you. And he gives you the imagination to picture him, even though we don't know what he looks like. It's this weird phenomenon I can't fully understand, but I know it, where we picture him and we experience his holiness for ourselves, and we let him change us. And maybe the response tonight is you actually just need to be in awe of him. Like, all of these men got wrecked in the presence of God. They were like, I'm done. Like, that's all. Like, he's God, he's awesome, and worshiped. And so maybe your response tonight is, I just need to see him. I need to fix my eyes on him and worship him. I need to declare the characteristics of who he is. I love that we did that earlier, but maybe it's just like you need to go in the back and you literally just need to say out loud what you love about him. But whatever it looks like, we're going to be people that respond because he's worthy of it. So would you stand with me? Jesus, we love you. God, we're thankful that you are a perfectly holy God, that there is genuinely no one like you. And we thank you, God, that you allow us to enter into your presence. We thank you that you allow us to be holy like you are holy. And so, God, we just ask that you would help us. God, in all of the ways that we don't fully look like you yet, would you come and help us? In the ways that it's hard for us to put our trust in you, would you help us, God? Would you help us see you rightly and be transformed in your presence? We love you, God. We're thankful for who you are, for all that you've done. In Jesus' name, amen.